In this video, I want to show you some things about WebPageTest that can help you improve the quality of your website so that you can engage customers better and improve your search engine rankings. Hey guys, this is Chris Love, the owner of Love to Dev, and today I wanted to go over one of my favorite tools, WebPageTest.org. Now, if you are a web developer or an online marketer, or anybody who owns or touches a website, this is a must tool to put into your regular workflow. Now, this tool's been around for several years now, and it was created by Patrick Meehan, who now works for the Google Chrome team. And I think this is kind of one of his 20% project things, but it's an open source project that many in the community actually commit and participate in. Now, you can go to webpagetest.org and you can plug in any public website URL and run a basic test. But let me just, before we do that, let's go over what you need to do to set up a test real quick. Now, the first thing I'm going to recommend you do is to create an account and log in. And this is, right now, I have just set it up with my little Gmail account. And this allows you to essentially keep a test history that you can go through. So this is just today, and I can go back, like say for a full year and update the list and also filter it out. It's going to take a little bit to build the list because I got quite a few things. Anyway, so you can see that there's just, a bunch of different runs that I've been doing that it's logged. But back to actually setting this up. Now the first thing you obviously need is a public URL. So you would just type it in there. I'm going to go ahead and just put one of my recent blog posts in there. And then you can select the location and then the device, which we'll see here in a second. But as you can see, there's quite a few data centers or locations where they have public instances of WebPageTest available. And each one of them has a variety of different browsers and device profiles that you can select. Some of them also will allow you to select the bandwidth speed, which is very important. Now Dulles, this one is kind of the default one, and it was the original one. But if you're trying to see how your experience might be in India or Australia, you would want to choose a data center closer to that, because if you've properly used a content delivery network, that's where your content will be coming from. Here you can select the browser. As you can see, this is the one that has the most variety of potential browsers. It also has a nice battery of mobile devices to test from. And I love this because now I can test on different kinds of devices as well. The default is going to be Chrome, but as you can see, they have Edge, Firefox, Chrome Canary, which is like the preview release before it goes public. The same with Firefox Nightly. There's IE11. They still have an IE10 and IE9 instance, although you should never do that because those browsers are no longer supported anyway. And then obviously a large list of mobile devices here. Now I'm just gonna stick with Chrome. Now there's multiple things you can do here. Most of the time you'll have this connection thing, and what it'll do is it'll use different connections. Some of these are real. I think they're all actually real here at this one. Some of them are simulated, but it's a good idea to kind of do different tests with different speeds. That way you get a better idea of what your site load profile really looks like. And remember, most web traffic today comes from a mobile device. So honestly, you want to really emphasize testing on those mobile devices if you really want to get a good profile. Now, by default, it's going to run one test run, and that default test run is going to be a first view and a repeat view. And the reason why it does that is the second view will be what your page looks like once you've already primed the browser cache. Now, if you've properly got cache control headers set up on your files, then the browser should cache or store those responses locally by default, meaning it doesn't have to make the round trip to the network, which means the second load is much faster. Now, obviously, things get a little different when you start using service worker caching, but that's definitely outside the scope of this video. Definitely recommend capturing video if this is available. And the reason why I do is because it gives you the ability to, as you'll see here in a minute, actually see what it looks like as your page loads. And that's really all you need to do. Now there are some other options that you can do here, but I'm not going to go into some of the deep stuff. What I want to do is I'll just let it run, but while we're waiting, I'm just going to go pull up the last test that I did. Oh, wait a minute. Not the last test. There we go. That's the last test that I did. Okay, so this one was already finished. The test runs can take a minute or two, and if the server's really busy, it could get backed up and it may take a little while. Another reason why I like to have the profile, because then I can just come back. Okay. Now, the first thing you should see is this visual scorecard up here. And as you can see, I've got A's all the way across and a checkbox for CDN. The only difference is the cache static content. Now, I'm going to dive into this real quick because it is a C to show you why. Now, I did upload a couple of images at the last second for this particular blog post, and so I didn't go through my normal deployment process, and I missed a cache control header on Cindy Crumb's image as well as Ryan Jones. Now, because I ran this test and noticed that, I did go back and fix that. So those are the two assets that I actually control that didn't have the cache control header. The rest of them all come from third-party tracking stuff. So things like my Facebook pixel, the Twitter pixel, the Google AdWords pixel, the LinkedIn pixel, all these things do not set cache control, and that's because they're trying to track the user, so they're not going to set that on there. But they're outside of my control, and honestly, that's kind of okay. So let's go back. So in essence, really, this is as far as what I can control, A's straight across the board. If I really wanted to make my page technically load faster, I would remove all those third parties, but then I would lose my ability to retarget and market to those people effectively. Now the next thing is essentially this little scorecard here of numbers and things, and this may not mean a lot to you at first, but I tend to like to focus on this first row of the first view. And I see the load time is 2.691 seconds. Now personally, to me that hurts because I really want to have that faster. But as you'll see here in a minute, most of that latency is due to those third-party pixels and scripts. And again, outside of my control. And because of the way they're loading, they're not necessarily affecting my user experience like you would think. Now the time to first byte is 0.302 seconds. I'm a little worried about that because to me that's a little bit slow, but that will vary. This is another reason why I tend to like to make multiple runs, because then I can see how the server varies a little bit. We'll get into what composes that in another video in more detail, and I will talk a little bit about it here. But this is one of the more important things to me, is the start render. This is when the browser really starts rendering the content. And we'll see kind of how this materializes here in a moment. The speed index is something that Patrick created that I think is a very good metric. And ideally, you want to have a speed metric score of 1,000 or below. Most web pages tend to be somewhere closer to 10,000, which means that there's a lot of room or a lot of opportunity for you to tune your page to compete against those slower pages. But basically the way this works is he does a little bit of calculus. Because the WebPageTest tool basically takes running screenshots of your page loading, it runs analysis over those images to see how many pixels have not been rendered. And essentially, this score is the area under the curve, or effectively, what's the typical experience as far as breaking it down on like every time slices, and we'll go over that here in a second. Basically, how many pixels are not actually rendered over the course of time it takes to render your page. And I know this is a little bit complicated thing. If you go to the site, he's got a really good explanation of it. And maybe I'll make just a video on explaining that topic one day soon too. But this is probably the most important number right here. And this is the first interactive. And this is something new he's come up with. And so I think they're going to be fine tuning that. I think this is a bit delayed right here, being 4.27 seconds on my particular pages. because I know they render and are active more. I think this is more due to those third-party scripts. But basically, this is the actual page load metric you really ultimately need to be measuring. It's not really this first byte time, which I think a lot of search engine optimization experts fixate on as this time to first byte. It's more important to fixate on this particular number because this is a more holistic representation of your page load experience. Now there's some other values over here that you can also look at. Now I've got nearly a megabyte of content being downloaded. Personally, I'll probably look at that and see where am I doing that, and we can also look at that here in a moment. The number of requests, all these kind of things. There's also a link out to a site that one of my friends, Tim Cadlick, made that actually calculates how much does it cost a customer to download that particular web page over a cell connection in their country. And that's another interesting tool that's out there that I'll also cover in an additional video. But here's one of my favorite things right here, and this is the waterfall. Now you have access to a waterfall in your browser's developer tools. Just hit F12, and every browser developer tool has a tab called Network or Networking, and you'll see something very similar. WebPageTest provides probably a lot more detail in their waterfall, and so I really like to go over it. Now, my sites all use HTTP2, which means that there is one simultaneous request for all the content. Again, very technical, but if you have not upgraded to HTTP2 yet, I highly advise you to do so because your site speed will improve anywhere from 10 to 80% depending on your site's configuration. Now, I have seen some say even up to 95%, but I would just say 10 to 80% is the range, which obviously is a big wide range, but 30% here, 20% there, it all adds up. Now, the reason why the time to first byte is not necessarily the best thing to look at, and this is where search engine optimization people tend to fixate on, is notice this says 261 milliseconds. But notice everything else happens after that. The reason why this is not the place to fixate on is because this is the first page. This is your actual markup, and the markup has all the references for all the other files that compose your site. And so none of these requests can happen until that markup is parsed, which means it has to be downloaded and then parsed. And once you can do that, then all these remaining requests can happen. Now, if I click on this, we can actually break down the details of this particular request. So you can see, and when I say break it down, obviously HTTP2 is my protocol, but here's what I'm looking for. The request started at 0.127 seconds. The DNS resolution took 27 milliseconds. I'm very happy with that time. Anything under 50 milliseconds for DNS resolution, in my opinion, is a good thing. If you can get it down to 10, even better, but 27 is a fantastic score. The time to make that initial connection was 34 milliseconds. Because HTTP2 requires SSL, you will need to go through an extra layer to do the SSL. That is a slight performance hit, but it's more than made up when you use H2. Now the actual time to first byte, which means the time it takes for that markup to go from the server to your browser, in this case was 175 milliseconds. And then the rest of it, the content downloaded was empty. The total number of bytes in of markup was 10.1, and this is a good number right here. If you know anything about the technicalities of how HTTP works, you want your content to be under 14 kilobytes, and that's because it makes one single round trip. Once you get over 14 kilobytes, it has to make two, and the second one is 32 kilobytes and so forth and so on, up to 4 megabytes. That's actually the biggest frame you can get, to my knowledge, over TCP. Now when it's unzipped, which means I've got all this gzip compressed, it does expand out to 50.2 kilobytes. So there is that. But that's basically breaking this down. So it gives you insight into where your potential bottlenecks are. So basically most of my 261 is the networking time from my CDN's data center over to the WebPageTest data center, which I think they're actually in the same physical data center. So anyway, but then this is going to break down all the other files that are being requested. And one thing that I think is kind of interesting is these files, even though some of them are very small, like I know this one is uncompressed. I do need to optimize my CSS. That's for darn sure. Um, you can see this one is 1.7 kilobytes, but it still takes right about the same time. And I think this is because of the way the multiplexing in H2 works. Um, and then here we're seeing these are images. All the purple ones are images. So you can identify any image that may be out there. Right now I've got most of my images are nice and small, so I'm not really seeing a whole lot there. Um, the orange are JavaScript files being downloaded. Now JavaScript and even CSS, the download part is just the start of things. JavaScript in particular is what we call a blocking process, and this halts the critical rendering path because the browser has to download the file, and then it has to evaluate the script, then execute the script. And this takes time, and this gets amplified up to 20 times more on mobile devices than desktop. And this can be a big reason why it takes a long time for your page to load, is because the browser has to stop everything and execute those scripts to see if there's any integrable damage or change to the DOM. And if so, then it has to go back through and re-render everything all over again. And unfortunately, this happens a lot with JavaScript, especially third-party scripts, causing you to go back through that critical rendering cycle. And this is why pages exhibit things like what we call jankiness. This is when you see the page jump around as it's loading, or you may scroll and then it jerks up or jerks down, all these kind of things. That's because the JavaScript is poorly written and causing problems. Okay, now you can see this is my site, and now we're getting into the third-party stuff, and this is where things kind of go sideways as far as my network waterfall profile. And that's to be expected because of the way those scripts work. And this is where the vast majority of my load time is. But notice right here, this gold line right here, this is DOM interactive. That means that that's when somebody can actually start interacting with the page. And I'm at 1.2 seconds. So personally, I like that number. Remember, at 1 second, that's when people mentally start disconnecting from a page waiting for it. Now down here, we've got an interesting thing here. One of the reasons why the JavaScript stuff and everything is a blocking process is because the browser only uses one thread to actually do all of the client-side processing, rendering, etc. And this line right, this row right here, shows you how the CPU is being used at the different points of the load time. The orange being JavaScript and the purple being CSS rendering, I believe. And so you can kind of see where the process is actually being utilized. And here you can see, is the page actually interactive? Greens mean yes, red means no. And so this right here, this red, that's jankiness, okay? And again, this is because of third-party scripts, okay? But here you can see the CPU utilization. You can see how much bandwidth is being used at any given point. And so you get a good profile of how your page is actually being loaded. Now there's more stuff down here, obviously, but I do want to kind of keep this at a reasonably high level. Now the next thing I really like to do is I like to look at the Filmstrip view. And I like the Filmstrip view because it allows me to kind of break it down really quick. And because my page honestly loads fairly quickly, I don't have a lot of images here. If your page takes longer to load, it'll break it down even more. Here it's breaking it down into half-second segments. But if you have a really large one, it may be a second. I've also had other profiles where it did every 10th of a second. But you can see here, the first 1 second, there's like nothing being rendered, and then bam, it suddenly gets rendered. So honestly, I want to look at this a little more to see what I can do to maybe improve that. And I think a lot of that's going to be removing a lot of the unused CSS. I've been very lazy about that with this particular layout this year. I've got a new version I'll be launching soon, and I'm going to try to make sure that my CSS is very lean and mean so that I can maybe bump that over to that half-second mark, and or bump this over to the half-second mark. So I really like that a lot. Now, to get even better experience here, let's go to the video view so we can actually watch a video of our page being loaded. And if I go click this, we'll see, bam, And bam, there we go. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so this gives you the tools that you need to recognize that. Now, I said I could break down where's the weight of my page. Obviously, I've got it right at about a meg. So right here, I'm looking at a third of it is images, a third of it is JavaScript. And the reason is because I'm using some third-party stuff, and I think they're a little bigger than I would normally be. And again, I said my CSS is not as optimized as it should be. Right now, it's a quarter of the page, and the fonts, the actual markup, and other. Not sure what the other is off the top of my head, but anyway, you can see how the content breakdown is. Now, honestly, in the end, I can definitely reduce that, and I can definitely reduce that. The images, like I said, are pretty well optimized at this point. There's not a lot I can do with that, but I can definitely try to trim this stuff down right here, and these two right here in particular will really help my page load profile. So that's a quick run through of just how to do or how to use WebPageTest through the online interface. Now, WebPageTest offers node modules that you can use in an API, and you can fully integrate and automate this, so you can make this part of your natural development and deploy workflow, part of your integration test, if you know what that means. The other thing too is it's also available as for private instances. There are Docker containers available, and you can stand those up fairly easily. I have not done it yet, but I know you can do this in Amazon's AWS. There are like stock containers, I believe, available for there as well as virtual machines. And I know a lot of companies will stand up private instances. You can also script web page test so that you can make an automated uh, run through your site. So you could actually make it run through and test some different uh, user paths and user story scenarios, things like that. Run smoke tests for you. All these kind of things. Now, this is not going to be the same kind of tool that, say, using WebDriver would be. This is about identifying performance issues, and it's going to provide you tons of data. What I showed you is just the tip of the iceberg. These are kind of the immediate go-to things that I look at to get the quick things that I can go address. There's a lot more information here, and you can get very detailed, and you can go way down the rabbit hole with a tool like this. And I do highly encourage that, but once you identify a lot of things, it's going to propagate around your site, and you're going to have a very good loading profile for your site and all of your pages. And as a marketer, this means you're going to be able to engage customers much easier. You're going to have more traffic on your site because people won't leave, and that's ultimately going to improve your search engine rankings across the board. So if you got any questions about web page test, leave those in the comments below, and I'd love to have a dialogue with you. Again, this is one of my favorite tools, and I'd love to see what you think about it. I want you to go try out some of your pages, and let me know if you got any questions about the results you're seeing, or maybe some additional tools to help you address some of the issues that you identify in a web page test run. So thanks a lot, and I hope you've enjoyed this video.